Okay, this is hopefully a quick video addressing conservative atheists' response to this sort of ArgusEyes, BoundlessEyes, the battle for clear sight. I think he makes an interesting point here about, because you see a lot of these gender roles in a global way, they're not, you have a consistency. He makes the argument that they're biological or therefore genetic, and I think it's a reasonable argument, but I think it glosses over some very important factors that I want to talk about real quick. The problem is that societies are successful or not based on their behaviors and the way that they socialize their members. And to give you an example, if there is a number of tribes in close proximity to one another, the one that has the most effective social practices that give it the best chances for the survival of its members, the feeding its members, raising the most young, etc., that tribe is going to eventually outcompete its nearby neighbors. And it's a process that's pretty similar to the biological evolutionary process, which we see in populations of species. So I'm going to talk quickly about how certain social systems actually are preferred over other social systems, regardless of biology. And I'm also going to talk quickly about the way that biology of men and women, which absolutely exists, and I want to talk about that just briefly here, how the role that it plays has changed historically for us. So, first of all, and this is an argument that I heard a long time ago. I can't remember where it was from. It's probably just from another person. I'm not going to claim this is like published work or anything like that. I just want to talk about it real quick because I think it's an interesting thought. So, if you have two different tribes, and say they're in conflict for resources, one attacks the other. Now, say tribe 1 loses 50% of its population, and that 50% it loses is half male, half female. Now, that tribe now has its ability to reproduce the next generation lowered by 50% because the rate limiting factor is the number of females in the tribe and their gestation period. I mean, basically. You can, estimate, a child per year or whatever. Now, the other society sends only its men to war. It loses the same number of people, but it has, there's like 1 or 2 men left over. The interesting thing is those 1 or 2 men can then repopulate the entire tribe at a 100% reproduction rate as compared to before this conflict. So a tribe that's going to have then the next generation be twice as big as its neighbor is going to eventually outcompete its neighbor. And this is something that we see as a very big factor in terms of what societies are successful. And it's this kind of thinking that you see in things like the biblical quote, which I think has been spread around in so many atheist arguments about why the Bible is evil. But when you consider it this way, it's interesting. The quote, I'm not going to give the scripture stuff. I've never been a Christian, so I don't really know all that stuff. But the quote essentially saying, go in, you kill the men and the women, and you keep the virgins. And the reason is because women were historically a very strong resource. Because again, they were the rate limiting factor for how big your next generation is going to be. And for a man, the more women that you impregnate, the larger the vector is that you are using to disseminate your genetic progeny. Sorry, I can't think of the right word right now. So this is a very interesting idea of women as a resource, and I'm not looking at this in a sort of a moral sense. I'm looking at this in a very pragmatic sense of roles historically. The other one is, you say men have a tendency to be leaders and to be stronger or whatever. And again, this is a historical issue, and it has evolutionary psychology roots, which is the strongest, the most violent and male is the one who is able to sort of sequester the most females as his resource by which to pass on his genetic information. And because men are limited by the number of women they can impregnate, and women are limited only by, they're limited by how often they can become pregnant, there's a much bigger reason for men to be violent and to fight other men. And you see this throughout the animal kingdom. This is not a human trait, this is an animal trait. And it's because the woman is the one who has to provide much more time for care, especially in humans more than a lot of animals. But you see this more exaggerated in animals, especially larger animals, where there's a longer care period for the young. Whereas men are going to evolve to impregnate the most women they can, because this is a more effective strategy in terms of natural selection and passing on your genetic information. So, and lastly, I want to end with, so there's this reason why men are more, why you see them in, historically in leadership roles. Absolutely. There's a reason why you see women as sort of protected and sequestered in these historical contexts. Absolutely. But now we find ourselves in modern times, and with the advent of the laws we have, with the changing of the rights of the sexes, and just of general human rights and individual rights, more and more we are not in a society where being big and strong and violent gets you the most mates. It is no longer a period where you're going to do best in terms of spreading your genetic information by being bigger and stronger. And so we're seeing more and more women are able to use their equal intelligence, their equal ability in science and engineering, equal ability in management, equal ability in sales. All of these things now, these are the important skills now. It's no longer about going and clubbing the guy in the next tribe and taking his food. That's not important anymore. And so in a modern context, we see that these areas on which men and women are absolutely on par with one another, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the evidence that I've seen, we're seeing these very dramatic changes in the dominance of sexes in more public and social roles. And you say that your argument is that, well, this is global, it's not local, it's not geographically segregated. Well, it really is geographically segregated. You're right, there's some general similarities, but the difference between social roles of women in the United States, or I'm sure the UK, compared to the social roles of women in certain Middle Eastern countries with different cultures, and it's dramatic. There is not the same rights. There is not the same percentages of women in these industries. It's very different, and that difference goes to show that there's a very strong social aspect that you kind of ignore when you say, well, there's these general similarities. Yes, maybe so, but when you look at the actual rights accorded to women in certain countries, there are dramatic differences based on location. So I just wanted to bring that up. Social effectiveness is a very important thing to consider here, and because the most effective societies have passed on these traditions, we have these same socializations, but you see we have these socializations much less in Western countries than you see in certain other countries. And when I say Western countries, it's because it's what I know. I'm sure there are many examples of Eastern countries where women have rights, comparable. Well, I can't say I'm sure, but my point is, I know there are some Middle Eastern countries that have far fewer legal rights for women. The point is, there is a geographical segregation, but what's interesting is that a lot of this can be explained as social evolution, social effectiveness, and how that then passes on a socialization to the next generation. So anyway, let me know what you think. I think it's at least an interesting thing to consider. Let me know.